Welcome to Sarder TV. I'm Vaishali Jain. We're excited to have Douglas Milligan join us today. Douglas is Senior Director of Education at CA Technologies, and he's here to tell us more about some of the transformational work happening in learning and development in business and industry today. Douglas, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
So you're Senior Director of Education at a company called CA Technologies.
I am.
First, tell us about this company and what it does.
CA Technologies, we are a software manufacturer. We make software that helps businesses achieve their outcomes. So what does that mean? That's a real highfalutin, kind of tagline. What it means is, for example, I'll give you an example. On your phone, maybe you do banking on your phone. You have an app on there. Well, there's a good chance that when you log onto that app, our software is validating who you are and giving you access to the bank. Behind the scenes, the transaction is probably managed by one of our mainframe software products. And then the application itself on the phone, probably one of our DevOps products, helps the bank to develop it, test it, and roll it out rapidly. So soup to nuts, we're not a software manufacturer that it rolls off the tip of people's tongues, but we drive a lot of business behind the scenes.
How large is the organization?
Ooh, about 11,000 people right now. So yeah, it's a good-sized organization.
Are there any products that the company has that are sort of mainstream or something that people might be familiar with?
I would say maybe not, because we do deal a lot with, about half of our revenue is from mainframe products, really designed towards helping like the big banks on Wall Street drive their business and do billions of transactions on an annual basis. So I don't know that the average user is going to really realize that. But our products, like I said, they're embedded in a lot of the things that you use daily.
So tell us about your role as Senior Director of Education.
I'm a jack of all trades to a certain extent. My team, the enterprise education team, we're focused primarily on internal employee enablement and I'll just list them out, for our R&D, our field services, our support organization, finance. We handle soup to nuts, their enablement. So that could be management training, technology training, role-specific training. One of my other hats that I wear is I own all of the annual compliance training. That dry material that you have to do annually, that comes out of my team, but we have made it much more interesting in the way that we deliver it. So realistically, we've done a pretty good job in making it much more enticing for people to take that than the standard dry compliance training. And then essentially the third hat I have is all of the vendor relationships that we have with education. That we use their material, like with Skillsoft and some other large vendors like that. That my team manages all that material and the relationships.
Now, was there a specific career path that you followed to get to where you are today?
Not really. My degree, realistically, from college was in history. So I had kind of a thought of becoming a history teacher, and I realized I really didn't want to do that. So, every role that I've had since I got out of college, for some reason I gravitated into either a training role or running an education organization. It was really strange how I kind of fell into it. But even when I was in the Army, I did a stint in the Army, I ended up training people. When I got out, I started working with CA Technologies on their support telephone line. Within a couple of months, I was training people on the product. From there, it went to running education for the team, then for all of support, and then essentially for a good chunk of CA. So kind of not your standard way to get into the role.
Now, one thing that learning and development leaders grapple with is really conveying the value proposition of education to employees and to leaders within organizations. Tell us how you've been able to achieve that.
I think one of the things, there's a couple things you need to do, but I think the most important in getting the value across to the people that you're trying to target, no matter what the program is, what is the what's in it for me message? Why is this important to me as an employee to take this training? And you can tie it, you need to think about that up front before you roll something up, but you can tie it to, okay, from a personal point of view, will I get more money out of this? Is it conducive to a new role? maybe career path. So you really have to, from an individual point of view, figure out what is that compelling, what's in it for me message. You also have to get management involved so they can also reflect that and support that and drive that message.
What would you say are some of the biggest challenges that learning leaders are grappling with today when it comes to learning and development?
I think there's a couple, but I think probably number one is the speed of change, particularly me in the technology field. It's pretty challenging to keep up with it all. I mean, back in the day it was just, okay, you got to teach them coding and project management. Now it's, machine learning is coming online, AI, blockchain, and for the high-tech companies, you got to stay up with that, and you got to get your people up to speed on that. I think another challenge that we deal with, it's kind of secondary, but we're all competing for the same talent. So the challenge is, number one, to get the right talent in, but since we're competing in a small kind of pool of people, a lot of times the people we're getting in, we have to put a lot of effort into getting them up to speed. So understanding that is probably one of the biggest challenges.
You also just said things are changing so rapidly, and so that means in terms of skills for employees, they need to constantly keep up to also stay relevant.
Yep.
How do you advise people to do that while they're doing their day-to-day jobs, is to continue to stay relevant and keep up with their skills?
Well, I think one of the things, and again, we have to rely somewhat on their frontline manager, but we have to kind of give them a roadmap on where the company is going and where the kind of their domain is going over the next couple of years. I think, and I'm going to refer to it probably several times today, but the World Economic Forum reports, when they come out, I read them soup to nuts because they lay out the roadmap for where we're going over the next few years and the challenges we're going to have. We need to make sure that people really understand that over the next 5 or 6 years, jobs are going to change significantly, and we need to make sure that we're getting that word out to our people so they realize you got to keep reinventing yourself. I can tell you what I do now, even being in the education space for 25 plus years, I've reinvented myself in that space numerous times.
What are some things that you do personally to make sure that you're staying up to speed and keeping up?
Attending industry events, meeting with people like yourself or others in the industry, taking courses. One of the areas that I'm interested in, and I'm probably jumping the gun on one of your questions later on, but I've been taking over the last 6 to 8 months courses on AI and machine learning, because in HR and talent development, that's the coming wave, and we need to get prepared for that. Now, I'm probably not an expert at it at this point. I know enough to be very dangerous, but I know the basics, and I see what's coming, and in our space, we need to really be up to speed. So that's what I do. I try to understand what's coming, and then get ahead of that personally.
How are machine learning and AI going to be impacting things like talent development and learning and development? How do you see it impacting in the future?
Across the board in HR and talent development, I think there's going to be a huge shift. Over the next 5 years, if you don't get on the bus now, you're going to have a hard time competing 5 or 6 years down the road. I see what's coming down the pipeline. I've had conversations with IBM because they're using Watson to really, in their talent acquisition, to really identify the right candidates to pull in. And that's kind of where I see this going, where you can use machine learning for talent development, for education. How cool would it be for a person to be able to plug in some parameters like, hey, this is my role, this is how long I've been in the field, this is what I'm interested in, these are the projects I've worked on, this is the learning I've had in the past, and it to come back with a customized set of recommendations that are really valid. Because right now, in education, it's typically canned learning paths, or something that gets stale very quickly. People want customization, personalization on what I'm interested in. So that's machine learning, AI will be able to do that. In fact, in some cases it can right now. Degreed. If you're familiar with that company, and I've looked at them extensively, they are kind of scratching the surface on where we can go with this. That's the wave of the future.
So you led CA's learning transformation by developing CA University. That was one of the things that you did.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay. Well, that was a lot of work, number one. But it really started about 8 or 9 years ago in our support organization. You know, the support organization GM came to me and said, hey, we need to do things differently. You know, rather than just, you know, throwing out learning and here's product learning. And, you know, while we did that very well, he wanted to do something to transform it, to make his people much more engaged. And obviously, as a consequence of that, to raise customer satisfaction. You know, support is directly engaged with customers. He wanted to see that number raised significantly. So, you know, we got together with him and his senior management team and did a lot of planning on what is the framework of this university? What does it look like? How would it be compelling to his people? And I would say the number one thing to really make it successful was his support. You know, he was our biggest advocate, our biggest cheerleader. In every meeting, he would talk about Support University. And I can tell you, within 6 months, we had demonstrable ROI on it. You know, from internal employee engagement scores to customer sat scores, which over the course of several years went double-digit improvement. So, I mean, it had demonstrable results. And the good part was we piloted it and did a small, you know, did it just in our support organization. But because of those results, I had other orgs knocking on my door. You know, and that's not off, you don't often get that, but they said, hey, we saw what you did for support. What can you do for us? So that's when we decided, let's kind of blow this out to the entire company if we can.
You mentioned ROI. Can you talk a little bit about how you measure the success of your programs,
Sure.
your learning programs?
Sure. Well, one of the things, I mean, traditional success, you know, metrics for education programs was number of butts in seats. I really don't care about that. You know, the smile sheets at the end of the course, did you apply it on your job? Those are great, and they give you good feedback about the course and where you can improve the course, but they're not business metrics. You know, so we went into this with the concept, it's not education metrics we're going to measure ourselves on, it's the business. And we went to support and said, what needles are you trying to move here? And they said, well, customer sat, you know, the technician's knowledge of the product, overall, you know, success of the implementation, and employee engagement. So those, you know, 3 or 4 different metrics were the ones that they were targeting to improve. And within 6 months, we started to see it move, and it just accelerated over several years.
Any other changes that you worked to implement as you were going on this transformation? Yeah,
we, at the same time, or actually it was probably a little bit after we rolled out Support University, we did something called Vital Behaviors. And it was really targeted towards our customer-facing people. What are the 8 vital behaviors we want them to demonstrate? So that was another large one, and that was more of a behavioral shift, which is more difficult, harder to measure. But we did a whole big change management plan where we got the management team on board first. And again, we started in the support organization because they were such advocates and they love being leading edge on all of our programs. But we started with them and we started with the management team and really got them involved early on. You know, so they fully understand what the intent was, what the vital behaviors were, what people should be demonstrating, you know, in all their interactions with themselves and with their customers. And then when we rolled it out, it was very easy to roll out because managers understood what was happening and what was expected of them.
What would you say are some key components that are often lacking in a learning and development strategy?
I think really looking at a much larger holistic approach. It's not just learning and development, but it's talent management. And I think tying it back, you know, we can put together this great learning strategy and have all these great, you know, bells and whistles and a great system and great education. But if you're not tying it back into, you know, the how you manage your talent, you know, the performance system that you use, you know, career management, how people are moving around within the company, you know, it's going to be lacking. So you really have to make it a holistic approach.
What would you say are some of the biggest challenges of integrating your education and learning programs into the organization?
Buy-in at times. You know, there's a lot of times where we'll get people, you know, managers, VPs, whatever level, coming to us and saying, I need a class on X. And it's like, let's talk about that a little bit. What is X and why do you need this? You know, and I think that that's part of the challenge is sometimes people are looking for a silver bullet. And we kind of take a step back and want a better approach. And there's times where I've said, no, I'm not going to do that for you. You know, and it's I think a mindset that's still out there and pervasive in management layers saying, I need a course to address something. And guys, let's take a step back because it may not just be the course, it may be some process that you need to take a look at. You know, it may be something on the managerial level. And I think that's our challenge, to ensure that we're not just seen as somebody holding an event that's going to solve everything.
Absolutely. It's a lot about this root cause, sort of a root cause analysis, right? To really figure out, okay, you're saying you need this course.
Correct.
But let's get to the bottom of it. And then oftentimes you kind of figure out, like you said, it's not really this course about this. It's more about.
Well, you know what, I look at, you know, my team, and it's less about, you know, while we still build courseware, I would say our team is very much more focused on performance consulting, which lends itself to that, is really getting to that root cause on what are you trying to achieve? You know, and what are the barriers to that? And let's figure that out. And it comes out that, yeah, education is a component of the solution, but it's a very small component usually.
What are some barriers that you've seen around building an effective learning management system?
The tool itself?
Yeah.
That's a very open-ended question. There's a lot of barriers. I mean, you know, you think about, number one, they're huge. They're massive systems. Are they tied into the rest of your HR systems? Or is it a standalone solution? That's probably the number one choice. You need to think about that, because we had one system for our LMS and one system for the rest of the HR systems, and they didn't talk to each other very well. So they were disconnected. So that's one thing you need to think about. When you're rolling it out, you need to think about historical data. What are you going to do with that? Do you roll it in? All the content that you have, you know, when we were changing from one LMS to another, we kind of went back and looked, and we had like over 10,000 pieces of content in the LMS. Do you migrate all of that? You know, how do you make it compelling and easy for people to find? Because, you know, you have to have a content strategy at the same time, because at some point when you have 10,000 items in there, you can't find anything. So you really have to have a strong content management strategy, and that leads to the question, do you really need an LMS, or do you need a content management system? Because in this day and age, even at CA, I would say more than half of the learning assets we use don't sit in the LMS anymore. So there's a lot of things that you need to consider, and they're all challenges. And you have to have pros and cons for each one to determine, because an LMS is a huge undertaking and a huge cost.
How do you go about building an organizational culture that supports learning?
From the top down. You know, we were lucky, you know, when our CEO came in, Mike Gregoire, he was a big supporter of education from day one. And then, I guess it was about a year in, we rolled out a technology training program where we allowed engineers to go out and source their own learning. And if there was a cost associated, we would get them the funding and get them into the course. Well, he went through that process himself because he wanted to learn about blockchain. And he had such a great experience and learned what he needed to learn that he became one of our hugest advocates. And it just goes to the old adage, you know, talk the talk, walk the walk. It's easy for upper management to say take training, but he actually was doing it, and he took it, and he was relaying his experience to the organization. And I saw that numerous times where you had leaders being the first one to go in and try out a program, take a program, participate in a program. They have to be involved, and that's how you drive it.
Many leaders talk about the challenges of engaging the next generation of the workforce in learning and development. And so talk about what some of the challenges you faced are and how you've addressed that.
They're challenges, and we're still potentially struggling with some of them. I mean, if you look at where we were with learning 20 years ago, you had a classroom learning, 3-day, 4-day, 5-day, multi-day sessions. Nobody can afford to send their people or pull the people out of the business for that. So over the years we learned, you know, you can do a lot of it via the web. You can chunk down your content into bite-sized chunks, and I think that's part of the solution. But for the learners coming online now, I look at my kids, my daughters, who are 19 and 23, gotta have to think there for a minute, but they're on their phones all the time or their devices, and they're reading and they're taking their classes on their devices, and looking things up and referencing. We need to meet them where they are. We need to make the content accessible on mobile devices, on any device, and it needs to be, it does need to be bite-sized chunks. It needs to be small learning nuggets. And we've also found when you roll out large e-learning catalogs, and I'm not going to name any names, but they have courses, and the course could be an hour, 2 hours long. In this day and age, nobody completes those courses. And I question the value of those, but they do have value because they went in and took the 2 or 3 modules out of that course that they needed. And we need to get better at that. And there's some companies that do that very well, where you can just go and take the modules you need. You don't have to take the whole course. We need to get to that point.
So you talked a little bit about it. Can you talk a little bit more about how you're incorporating a digital strategy into your L&D?
Well, I mean, there's so many ways you can approach this. We use a variety of different tools, and I think that the key is, for us, is to be able to build out, learning plans or curriculums rapidly, deploy them, and then when they're done, pull them, get them out of the way. So you need to have tools that can really do that quickly for you and pull in different types of content from anywhere. It could be from our LMS, but less than 50% of the content people consume is from our LMS. It could be articles on the web. It could be internal sites. It could be YouTube. I love YouTube. I've learned so much from YouTube. It could be a 30-second snippet from YouTube. So why aren't we incorporating that type of content? One of the tools, and I'll call it out, it's called Resume that we use. I actually tried it out myself, and I stood up a very complex curriculum within less than an hour, and it included content from all those types of sources. That's what we need to do. And the cool thing is, if you need to modify it, you can just plug and play new content into it. We need to get to that point, because things are just moving so rapidly. Content gets outdated. The link gets pulled down. You need to replace the link. We need to be able to do that rapidly.
What would you say are some of the advantages and disadvantages of digital learning?
Rapid deployment. People get what they need when they need it, on whatever device they need it. That's great. Disadvantages. It's not appropriate for all types of learning. I know that some people will disagree with me on that, but am I going to learn how to whiteboard from an e-learning class? I can learn the basics, but the only way you're going to learn to whiteboard is to do it in front of a crowd with some feedback. So there's certain things that they're not going to be able to be deployed well, in that type of environment. Whereas technology training, coding, things like that, annual compliance training, that can be done via a very strong digital approach, bite-sized chunks, all of that. But for some things, soft skills training, I'm not convinced that that can be done effectively and have lasting results via, digital bite-sized chunks.
So you talked about some of the tools that you found effective when it comes to digital learning, saying videos and YouTube and articles and things like that. Anything else? What are some other things that you found that are most effective digital learning assets? I
would say for the younger generation, and I have to be careful on how I approach that, but it is video based. It seems that resonates. That's the way that they learn. They've been brought up that way on their phones. I think for, depending on the audience you're targeting, for me, I need to read something. I need to take notes to really absorb it. So I think you need to look at who you're targeting and use tools that really bring that to life for those audiences. And in the education space, there's so many tools out there. And so many more coming online with startups that, if you want to do something video-based, there's tools for there. If you want to do something that breaks out articles into just the pieces you need, there's tools that do that. So research on what tools are available. You need to spend some time doing that.
What do you recommend for small companies or, firms that are just starting up who might not have big budgets for implementing big L&D programs? How can they incorporate a robust L&D program?
I mean, the one tool I referenced for building curriculums, Resume, That's a great tool. And from what I remember, and I'm not on the purchasing end of things, but I believe that was relatively inexpensive. There are tools out there that are relatively inexpensive, that are very robust, very targeted. So I would say there's tools out there. They can be, there's open source tools, but with open source, there's more work involved in setting it up. Support is potentially lacking, but there are plenty of tools out there for people on a tight budget. And for me, like I said, I'm a big believer in YouTube and content out on the web. I don't build technical training anymore. I used to 10, 15 years ago. I don't do that anymore because it's out there. I'm utilizing what's out on the web, and most of it is low cost. Or even there's vendors out there like Pluralsight, Udemy, all of those small vendors. They have great courseware that you can get $10 access when they're on sale. I use that, why not? And we're a large company, but I still use those types of vendors because they are small, they're hungry, and they're cutting edge.
Tell us a little bit about how social media is incorporated into your L&D programs today.
I would say where we've had the most success with social media was within our leadership development program, where we would bring a cohort in, and they were large groups of potential leaders, and they would come in. But prior to them coming in for the variety of in-person sessions, they were put on a social media platform, and everything was kind of delivered through that. So throughout the program, which was over a year long, they were engaging with each other on that social media platform, networking with each other. They met each other face to face during several in-person sessions, and then post cohort, they continue to drive that. And we have very light touch to keep it active, but just seeding it occasionally with topics and new information, and it's been very active going forward. So great usage of it for a specific program.
Now, we talked a little bit about measuring success of L&D programs. Can you talk a little about data and data analytics and how you've seen that incorporated and played out in L&D?
I would say that I would like to use it more. We've used it some, not as much as we probably should. So, and there's a couple reasons for that, but I'll give a kind of a success story and then talk about the challenges to it. But in our sales onboarding program, very in-depth program, and we had some initial data saying, hey, it looks like if somebody goes through this sales onboarding program, their time to close their first sale is X number of days or weeks shorter. And that the data seemed to back that up, and we wanted to improve upon that. So we did some very deep dive analytics on the challenges that they had and where in the sales process they could improve. And it came up with some interesting data that allowed us to tweak the program to really drive those areas where they were struggling. So future groups brought that time to first close down significantly. So I mean, there's some great success stories, and I'm sure there's plenty others we could talk about, but do we use it extensively? No. I wish we used it more. I think the challenge that any organization have is getting a person that really understands that on board. L&D is typically not hiring a data analytics person into an education org. Doesn't happen often. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge, is getting a person or a team on board in education that can help you drive that. Because it's not something you can do part-time. That's a full-time gig.
Do you foresee that as one of the skills that L&D professionals should be working on?
I would say not across the board. I think L&D professionals need to understand it at a high level, but the deep dive, putting together the data, putting together the dashboards, you need a data analytics person. And then they can help you. Here's what I'm trying to understand. They can help you get to that point. But that's a whole, domain in itself that I don't think, an L&D person will be able to put the time and effort in to really get to that point.
What would you say are some of the key skills that C-suite leaders are going to need to have to navigate some of the big shifts that are happening in industry today?
Well, I think one of the key things that the C-suite needs to do is stay involved and understand what is happening in not just their industry, but across the board. So I think I referenced it earlier, but the World Economic Forum, they are a great predictor of what's happening and what will be happening and the shifts in the landscape. And I think all of the C-suite need to be aware of that, because that is going to, introduce potential challenges that you can get in front of. So I think that's kind of, I don't know that that's a skill that they need to have, but it's something they need to do and constantly be aware of what's happening.
What skills or behaviors, characteristics do you see lacking most today in our leaders?
I would say that probably critical thinking, problem solving, being a leader, being inspirational as opposed to managing. I've seen it, and we've all seen it through the years, that great managers get promoted into leadership positions. And they'll probably be somewhat successful, but are they inspirational? Do they inspire people to go over and above? And I think that's the challenge we have, is ensuring that we have people that have those kind of basic skills to really drive that inspiration.
What type of management leadership training do you think is required for leaders today to be able to navigate the digital shifts that are occurring in the industry?
I think they need to get out there and really take some time and spend the effort in getting into some of the kind of the leading edge leading programs that are out there. I went through an agile transformation with my team, and CA itself went through an agile transformation. One of the things that stuck in my mind, and I still think about, and some of my peers still drill me on, but is the concept of servant leadership, where yes, you're a leader, but you're also a servant to your people, and you need to remove the barriers for your people to be successful. Their success is your success, and I think it's very basic. But I think that there's a lot of leaders that just don't get that. And you can go to these multi-day leadership seminars and all. It's not that tough a concept.
Tell us about some of the skills that you're seeing lacking in the broader workforce that you feel are going to impact.
I can get on my soapbox now. One of the big ones, and this again from the World Economic Forum, but I see it day in and day out, soft skills across the board. We see, I'm going to say kids coming out of school, coming into the workforce, and they got great technology skills, but not great soft skills. They don't have the ability to get up there and present or collaborate well or facilitate meetings. So that's a challenge there, and we have to spend some time there. But I also see it at managerial levels or even very experienced people. For example, with our senior software architects, great technologists. These guys are the brains of what products are going to be built for CA. But when it came to presenting to the C-suite or GMs or even to companies that we're trying to sell to, they went into nuts and bolts and just bits and bytes, and that's not what a chief technology officer or a CFO want to hear. They want to hear what your software is going to do for us. How is this going to drive your business? And that's where we need to get to the point where we can really drive those soft skills that are lacking. I think some of the other ones that the World Economic Forum pointed at, and I think I mentioned it, was critical thinking, problem solving. And you notice I'm not saying any technology skills, because I think technology training and education has been commoditized. Did I say that right? You can go out and find it. You can go out and buy it. You can go to, there's universities. MIT just announced that they're putting together a whole college of AI and machine learning. I just saw that this week. So, I mean, it's there. The technology stuff is there. It's the other half of the equation, which in my eyes is probably the more important side of the equation.
Well, this was great, Doug. Thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thank you. This has been great. It's been an honor. I know all the other people that have been interviewed by Sarder TV, and I just feel like I'm in a very elite group to be able to do this.
And we'll see you next time on Sarder TV.